if we cast a political shadow on top of this, is Ontario is really a key battleground. If they want to really be competitive with the Conservatives, they've got to up their game in Ontario. That's why kind of, having someone from Southwest Ontario in the cabinet is probably a good move. And
tells us something,
Yeah,
right?
It tells us something, because on Ontario...
When you have a dream, you're like, I'm going to do that. Conestoga came to mind. The skills and the training were very practical. When that certificate came in the mail, my family was so excited. My name is Jen, and I'm a Conestoga graduate.
Elizabeth Briere, who is currently the Minister of National Revenue, and Bill Blair, who currently serves as the Minister of Defense. That's a big portfolio. Certainly interesting that there's no change there, given everyone promising, Nick, to accelerate defense spending in light of kind of the threats from the United States and the pressure from, to be fair, not just the U.S., but other allies of Canada's to accelerate the timeline we just put in place last year.
So I think what we're learning is a little bit of new,
yeah,
but, realistically no change, not a lot of news.
Doesn't feel like wholesale change.
No.
Like there is some change, but it's not like, other than Miller and some other big names like getting out. If you keep Blair, you keep Jolie, that says something.
And if Mark Carney was doing big changes as the cabinet, I think for a lot of Canadians, it'd be like, what are you doing spending all your time doing cabinet making when, an election is imminent, there are threats from Donald Trump and stuff like that? And it speaks to kind of like what I'll say, more of the caretaker, low bridge approach, where there are just a lot of familiar faces, but some new names at least in the mix.
Yeah, one new name there, Cody Bloy,
yep,
who is from out east, representing a riding in Atlantic Canada, who has been fairly outspoken in pushing back against Prime Minister Trudeau and particularly the carbon tax. That's a new face in cabinet, most certainly. We've got François-Philippe Champagne, who will move to finance. Rachel Bandayan, who remains in cabinet. She just got into cabinet at that last shuffle that was sort of against the backdrop of some weird circumstances with Chrystia Freeland and everything. And Gary Ananasangri, who moves over to justice, or adds justice, I should say, and attorney general to his portfolio. Yeah.
But I think probably what we're going to expect, Vashi, from the Conservatives is basically for Pierre Poilievre to say, hey, look, a lot of these names are the same. Same old, same old. Yeah, there's a couple new people sprinkled in, but that Pierre Poilievre will try to make the connection between the Carney administration, at least as of today, with the previous Trudeau administration. A lot of the same names, and kind of a, why don't we call it from a Conservative perspective, at least, a shuffling of the deck chairs, right? Not really anything significant, but
I anticipate the Carney camp is ready for that criticism, though. And I know that they're, for example, planning to announce, like they'll take a cabinet decision apparently during like the photo that's taken so that he can announce it when he speaks to reporters after the ceremony. My bet is that they know that criticism is coming.
And, I think probably what we're getting a glimpse of is at least what the next 7 days will probably be like, right? The key message of a new prime minister, the key message of a smaller cabinet, a couple key decisions that they can put in the window. And is the trip to Europe still happening?
It is, yeah.
Well, there you go.
Week, yeah.
I don't think he's going to go to Europe and come back empty-handed, because that would be not optimal.
Former Governor General David Johnston, I believe, and his wife just walked in as well. We keep our eyes peeled on those arrivals. Our senior political correspondent, Mike LeCouture, is on the grounds there at Rideau Hall. Mike, we've seen a series of arrivals now, probably in and around 20, which should mean Mark Carney is the last to arrive. What stands out for you, some of the new faces in particular that we're seeing come in?
Yeah, I think there's two arrivals that really kind of shocked me. Former Governor General David Johnston that just walked up, and he walked in as well. He's here in attendance, obviously. And you had RCMP Commissioner Mike Duhem, who just walked by, and I spoke with him briefly. And he said he's excited to see who his new boss is in public safety, whether or not he does have a new boss. But when you're talking about the new faces to cabinet, I mean, Cody Bloy, as you had mentioned, Vashi, and Ali El-Sassi, those are El-Sassi, excuse me. Those are two, as you had mentioned, that were not in cabinet before. And something that I'm also hearing from inside Carney's camp is that if anybody is trying to do some sort of a count on the regional representation, that is not something that they're going to be able to sort of make it equal all around, just in terms of the people that they want in cabinet and how they're able to sort of spread those jobs around as well. So, and the gender parity, the gender balance that we had seen under Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. That likely won't be achieved either. But certainly, I think sending a message again, they're trying to lean on people with experience. They're trying to make sure that the people who have had experience remain in cabinet. Interesting to see Bill Blair back in there and a number of other people as they continue to walk in and as we continue to see some of these people. But that is clearly the message that Mark Carney wants to send with this cabinet. Again, that this is, as Scott had mentioned and a number of other people, a wartime cabinet, one that they're trying to have a steady hand on the wheel as they go forward in those discussions with the United States. And I believe that there are other people, former Prime Minister Jean Chrétien is just walking up as well. He's just behind me, and he is going through a number of, I think he's not going the right way because he's being talked to by media and scrummed at this point.
Okay, let's.
Yeah,
I'm going to
has
cut
just
over to
arrived
that,
as
Mike.
well.
I'm going to interrupt you. So, Mike, I'm going to cut you off so I can listen in. Let's take a listen in live.
Smith. I met his father when I was Minister of Indian Affairs. You were not born, and that. Yeah, I think that he will do very well. He is respected internationally. You know, I was talking a few minutes.
Well, my secret's finally out. My favorite spot to shop for quality gold, silver, estate jewelry, and even...
Pourquoi est-il l'homme de la situation? Parlez-nous en français. Pourquoi est-il l'homme de la situation?
Ben, parce qu'il est bon, et puis qu'il est neuf, et puis qu'il a beaucoup d'expérience, puis il est respecté dans le monde. Alors, j'ai bien confiance.
So I have a
Et là,
lot of
c'est
faith.
stimulant, une situation comme
And
celle-là.
this situation is stimulating.
On est en politique, on aime
When
les
you're
défis.
politics,
Mais non, on n'a pas de la politique.
you have to have the right man for politics, I think. And
I will do what you can do with him. If you can tell me what he will tell tomorrow, he will have to adjust every day because the president has to be on the news every day. You will love him. He give you news every day. But when you're on a job like that, there's more than to be in the news.
What's your advice? What's your advice to Mr. Carney, sir?
Best advice is do your best.
Des conseils dans sa relation avec M. Trump.
his
Ben, il va faire de son mieux. Il n'y a pas de solution, on n'a jamais vu ça.
There's no solution. We've never seen
C'est pas
anything
une
like this.
situation normale.
This is not a normal
On n'a jamais
situation.
vu quelqu'un qui change d'idée à tous les 5 minutes, qui mène
But we've
les
never seen
États-Unis.
anybody who changes
Et
his
ça
mind
crée
every
des
5
problèmes
minutes.
partout,
This
pas
creates
seulement au
problems
Canada, là.
everywhere, not just in Canada.
De donner une entrevue à la BBC à Londres, et puis ils ont des
Giving
problèmes
them-
là-bas aussi, en Europe. Et
BBC
partout dans le
interview
monde.
in
Écoutez, il va faire
London
de
that
son
there's
mieux.
problems in
Je le
Europe.
connais bien, je
He'll
suis
do his
très
best. I
confiant.
know him well, and I have a great faith in him.
How tough a job is Mr. Carney facing right now?
It's a tough job. But you don't get in this job to have an easy job. I was on Parliament Hill for 40 years, and it was fun. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
That is former Prime Minister Jean Chrétien arriving to Rideau Hall. You can see big amount of media around him, telling reporters that the world is excited in his view. There's lots of interest in Mark Carney swearing in, and that he is supportive of him. We are standing by now for Mark Carney's arrival. 20 ministers, 20 people have arrived so far. I think we're looking at a cabinet of at least 22 or 23 people, which is substantially down from 37 that are currently in cabinet, but more than the kind of 15 to 20 that the Carney camp had indicated a few days ago would be the case. Some big names staying in cabinet: Mélanie Joly, Dominic LeBlanc, François-Philippe Champagne, Stephen Guilbeault, Bill Blair. 3 new faces that I could identify very easily that came in: Ali Assasi, who is an MP in the Ontario, the GTA, Ariel Keabaga, who is an MP for London, and Cody Bloy, who is an MP out in Nova Scotia. Those are the 3 new faces. I am here with Nick Nanos, Kathleen Monk, Scott Reed, and Lisa Raitt as we await the arrival of, I believe, the last person to arrive, which will be Mark Carney. We're about 25 minutes away from the official start of the swearing-in ceremony. Scott, I'm going to start with you on who we now have seen arrive. What does it tell you?
Well, it tells you that there is change. And look, there's going to be a big wrestling match today for the headline. You know, will it be just another Liberal cabinet, or is it the first Carney cabinet? Is it change or is it not? And I think, to be honest with you, Carney's going to win that arm wrestle because He's got all the advantages. There are a bunch of changes here in terms of faces and the size of cabinet, but also it will come down to that focus. A new prime minister with a new focus, very purpose-built, mission-made to take on Donald Trump. That's what we're going to hear. And then, as you point out, it's going to be anchored by announcements. I remember when Mr. Martin, my old boss, took over from Mr. Chrétien, who we just saw, we made 13 announcements on the same day that we took office. You have the machinery of government behind you, but he has it for at least another week or so. So you can power the coverage and you can drive the message with that institutional fortitude. And I think you are going to see him reinforcing not just change, but change, and as they've said, change and focus. Focus on Trump.
And here he
focus on the
is.
mission
Sorry,
ahead.
Scott, I'm just going to interrupt for a second and make sure our audience knows that that is Mr. Carney now. Making his way by himself, not accompanied by his family. Very different arrival, if I recall, from a decade ago when everybody walked up that driveway with their families. Obviously a very different time right now and a different period electorally because we're headed to an election. Mark Carney, hold on, let's listen in. He is saying something.
Our message, we're a very focused government, focused on action. We're going to get work.
En français,
Straight to work. Straight to work right away.
En français,
Nous sommes ciblés. On met l'action à partir
Action oriented?
Et il faut faire la cérémonie et quelques remarques.
Well, have to have the ceremony now. I will make a few remarks afterwards.
Sorry, Scott, I cut you off there, but he delivered the message himself from the mouth of the incoming prime minister, focused on action, action-oriented. Your take on that, and then I'll swing over to Lisa.
Well, that contrast, that in itself signals change from Trudeau, to the degree to which it felt like cabinet had gotten swollen. The agenda had gotten spread out. The focus had sort of drifted. Now we have the threat of Trump. It tends to stir the attention. And so Carney is taking advantage of that challenge, taking advantage of that crisis and saying, listen, that is our mission, that is our focus, and we're going to move at it, and we're going to move at it hard. And I think the day will be dedicated to that.
Lisa, your thoughts on what we've seen so far and what we just heard from Mr. Carney himself?
Well, definitely high stakes. I mean, if he's promising action, if he's promising that they're actually going to be able to get something done, then he's putting the pressure on himself to deliver. And if he doesn't deliver, it's going to be something that is going to be really difficult for him because excuses aren't going to actually work in this environment when you're saying you're going to get something done. And as a result, he's setting his own path in terms of where people are going to criticize him. I agree with Nick. I think that the reality is if he's going to Europe, he must have a deal cooking, because if you come back from Europe empty-handed, it's going to be a problem. But my understanding, Vashi, is that they wanted to actually get the swearing in and the cabinet all done earlier this week. They wanted to get the actual call for the election earlier. And guess what? They couldn't, because you run into the great brick wall of bureaucracy. It's not easy to get stuff done in Ottawa. I mean, that is an understatement. But now he's setting his own timelines that he's going to have to adhere to and hope that everything goes in his direction. Otherwise, he's going to get hammered with same old, same old. So risky for him to start saying stuff like this, bold, but he's going to have to deliver the goods.
Kathleen, your read?
Well, with great respect to my great respect to my friend Lisa, you know, who actually has been in cabinet and knows this. Let's just call it what it is. It's been 5 days. I mean, this is a remarkably fast transition. Mr. Carney became leader on Sunday night, and it's Friday morning. I mean, it is moving at record speed. The history books will show that previous leaders, people like Kim Campbell, took much longer than this to actually be sworn in and establish a cabinet. So looking at the history books, this is a fast transition. Why? Because we are in a really difficult, complex political landscape right now. Carney has to do a number of things. He has to not only establish his cabinet, you know, staff up his PMO, he also has to prepare for an election campaign, all while fighting an incredible onslaught of attacks and incoming fire daily from President Trump and the threat of an economic warfare. So he's got a lot on his plate, but I mean, I think we can't deny that this has moved at incredible speed. I think that it is, like Scott said, going to come down to the framing. Is this a new cabinet or is it the same old, same old? But when you cut your cabinet literally by approximately 15 positions, I think that is dramatic. That alone says it's a leaner, tighter machine focused on one thing, and that is the threat of economic warfare from the United States.
I think the primary way, given what we just saw, Nick, with who arrived, that they're going to try and deliver that message that Kathleen mentioned is through the size of cabinet. Because I don't know if you're going to be able to deliver it through the fact that all your big ministers remain.
Yeah, you know, the thing is, we would always talk about in advertising, you know, just focus on a couple things. There's a new prime minister, smaller cabinet. But two things that we really have to also talk about, you know, are the Liberals ready for an election? Do they have the candidates in place, you know, to wage war against the Conservatives who've been preparing for a very long time and have a big war chest and a very good organization? So it's not enough just to build on the goodwill of what might be in the polls right now, which makes them competitive. They've got to have boots on the ground. The other question, maybe I'll be the skunk at the party, why bring Jean Chrétien here? This is not a Liberal Party event. I could understand if Liberals were gathered here that they'd like to see the former Prime Minister because he's very popular within the Liberal family. But if you're trying to send the message that you're moving in a new direction and there's a new leader and a smaller cabinet and a new focus, why do you bring someone from the past? I think that's a bit of a head scratcher for me.
Maybe my guess would be, Scott, and I'll get you in on this, that lately Chrétien has been saying stuff on Canada, U.S. and Trump that has gone like a little bit viral, and probably maybe to build on that, I don't know.
Look, let's not, you know, get too lost on our cornflakes here. He's there because he's a former prime minister, the same reason David Johnson there is a former governor general, and this is a ceremony at Rideau Hall. That being said, I'm not in the same place in terms of the signals that it sends as Nick, because I also think it sends a it sends a signal about a return to a time when Canada did stand up in a very forceful way to the United States with respect to the Iraq War. That's embodied and personified by Mr. Chrétien. It also sends a signal of a return to a time when finances and focus were very much associated with the Liberal brand, with the job that Mr. Chrétien did, my old boss Paul Martin, in balancing the book. So that's small beer, man. That's not going to be the focus. The focus of the day is going to be the cabinet, the words that come out of Mr. Carney's mouth as Prime Minister for the first time, and the focus on taking on Donald Trump. And, you know, they're going to reinforce that frame today. And my guess is we're going to see a flurry of actions in the next 4, 5, 6 days. And then, bang, the writ drops and we're into a campaign that'll be fought around one issue and one issue only, and that is who can best take on Trump. And Poilievre's going to have to figure out how he enters that equation, because so far he's been scrambling to get inside.
Lisa, your thoughts, just jumping off of what Nick and Scott are saying about the messaging around this again.
Well, I don't think it's a secret that Mr. Chrétien and his cabinet ministers were kind of frozen out by the Trudeau regime, quite frankly. And as a result, this is a signal to those Liberals out there who would be more on the blue side, more centrist Liberals, that they're back. I think that's all that it is. And it's great to see Mr. Chrétien in good health. I want to go back to something, though, about this cabinet and the how it's so incredible that he's cutting the cabinet in half. So it's not, because these cabinet ministers may be taking on new portfolios, but there is no supply, they have no money to spend, and they don't have to go to parliaments, so there's no legislation. So that's 2/3 of their job is done. So there's no 2/3 of their job. They can take on as many portfolios as they can fit on their letterhead, because the reality is they don't have a lot of work to do except to nod and rubber stamp whatever policies the Prime Minister is going to be putting in place. That's it. So they're going to do that for a week. So I wouldn't give great praise to Carney for cutting his cabinet in half. He could have cut it down to 4 people, for God's sake. It really doesn't matter, because we're heading into an election.
I think that the symbolism, though, here is what it's all about. And that can be debated 100%, Kathleen. I think that they just, you know, even the way that Carney spoke, like the word focus is on purpose, because his criticism of, and largely other parties' criticism of the Trudeau government is the lack of focus.
Yeah, and if you just juxtapose the images from 2015, 10 years later to the images today. It was a bright sunny day in 2015. As you said, families walked up, you know, to the Governor General's residence, you know, arm in arm. There was a mass of people. Carney was there singularly. The weather's kind of cooperating with him. It is good weather today in Ottawa, for Ottawa at least, but it's not as sunny and bright as it was that day back in 2015. And that focus that he's driving, that kind of, you know, austere, like laser focus on dealing with Trump, it kind of came across in his comments as he walked into the GGs today.
Yeah, whether the message lands is a different story.
That's right.
I want to go to Rideau Hall again, where my colleagues Mike Couture and Colton Prale are both stationed for us. Colton, I'll start with you. Your observations as you stood there. You're right there when Mr. Carney was talking and as the ministers walked up. I think we have Colton.
And even the new Liberal MPs who came into this were Liberal MPs that most of us who follow the Hill very closely are immensely familiar with. These are, by and large, people that we've seen, handling press, being the ones to stop and speak with media. And so I really wonder how much change it is that we are actually seeing in this. I thought it was quite interesting that we saw David Johnston. We also saw Michel Jean, former Governor General as well, heading into this. There is a little bit of that, kind of as Lisa put, push to recenter on not just the new direction of this party, but the past of this party as well, the past before Justin Trudeau, and a return perhaps to a little bit more of a centrist Liberal party. I think that was the thing that stood out to me the most among these guests of honors that we're seeing arrive other than the cabinet ministers.
Mike, what about you?
Yeah, I think, picking up on what Colton is saying, I think, when you consider the size right now. I mean, we were all being told possibly 15 to 20, and now I think we're counting over 20 at this point. So this isn't that much of a slimmer cabinet. It is significant when you come down from 37 ministers, including the Prime Minister, and really the signals that they're trying to send with who they are putting in what position, making sure that these people have their hands on it and really combining a lot of these ministries and moving some people out of positions like Stephen Guilbeault, who was Environment and Climate Change Minister. I think moving him, giving him a bit of a break from that, but at the same time keeping him in the fold, I think is an interesting move as well, Vashi, when you consider how much of a lightning rod he's been, especially to somebody like Danielle Smith, Alberta's Premier, and out west as well. Keeping somebody like Jonathan Wilkinson as Natural Resources Minister, I think will be key when you consider how much that will be central to these discussions with the United States. We know that President Trump wants Canada's natural resources. He said as much, and to have somebody like Jonathan Wilkinson, who does have a lot of experience in that field in business. We also understand that he and Mark Carney have been friends for a number of years. He's been a very vocal supporter of Mr. Carney as well. So that doesn't surprise me, but some of the new faces I think are a bit of a nod to the regional representation. When you consider that Cody Bloy is somebody from Atlantic Canada, they need to try and make sure that they are extending an olive branch out east as well. And it'll be interesting to see going forward. When Mark Carney talked about action-oriented, that really business speak. When a lot of people look at this, we, as a country, are now going to be run by somebody who has a long time and a lot of experience in business. So the possibility of this country being run more like a business, I think, are what Canadians might be able to look forward to, Vashi, as well as that action-oriented, getting down to work, and to the point that a number of people on the panel have been making. They don't have a choice but to do that right now. They have to make sure that they are at the task at hand, because we know April 2nd is coming very, very quickly. And following that conversation and that meeting yesterday with Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary in D.C., there were positive signs, but at the same time, they need to make sure that they are having those conversations at the table, and that you have to wonder how soon after today, how soon after the writ is dropped, will we possibly see Mark Carney take a side trip from the campaign to go to D.C.? Will he be seen with Donald Trump? Will he go into the Oval Office? We know that Carney had said in his conversations and in his in some of what he said publicly, he will only do that and if the meeting is respecting Canadian sovereignty and making sure that that issue is off the table. So I think, we will see those types of lines going out today, and that type of, focus of this cabinet as well, Vashi.
That's Mike Couture and Colton Prale on the grounds. They're outside at Rideau Hall. You're looking live inside Rideau Hall, where the swearing-in ceremony is supposed to get underway in 10 minutes' time. I got to tell you, I've covered about 1 million of these at this point. The fact that there's about 10 people in the room does not bode well for that timeline. So we will keep our fingers crossed and keep our eye in that room. I'm here with Nick Nanos, Kathleen Monk, Lisa Raitt, and Scott Reed. I think, jumping off, Nick, what Mike mentioned, I mean, we're talking about this in a way as though this is like a brand new cabinet. It's like there's an election a week and a half away, right? Like there's many differences between now and 2015. 2015, they just won a massive mandate and they were beginning a 4-year term. This is something that effectively will be in a campaign 10 days from now.
Yeah, and I think, there's been a lot of talk about action and lots of action and stuff like that. He's never been elected to anything. And this government doesn't really have a mandate, right? This new government and this new cabinet doesn't really have a mandate. It's a caretaker from the previous administration. I think I would be surprised if this new Mark Carney cabinet decides to do a lot in a short period of time or have a bunch of announcements. I think if it's going to be about focus, focus of the cabinet and a streamlining of the cabinet, focus of his efforts and energy, I would expect only a couple to be announced and not a lot, because people are going like, what's up with this? There's going to be an election. What are you doing stuff? You haven't been elected. And, Canadians have not had a chance to render their vote and either to support or not support what Mark Carney will end up proposing.
My guess, I don't know, I maybe guess a little bit differently, Scott, in that I think that they will want to convey, maybe not 13 in the first day, but they will want to use the ability to govern to their advantage politically, just like we saw in the Doug Ford campaign, for example.
Yeah, and I agree with Nick in that you're not going to see a cascade of announcements about a wide variety of topics. That would make no sense. But you may see a handful of announcements, and some very high profile and focused, all around the subject of our relationship with the United States, our ability to sustain and protect our economy. I mean, if he goes to Europe, well, he's going to Europe to get a deal. If he goes to the Oval Office, he's going to make a point. So that's what I think, you're going to see actions of that sort, or the possibility of those actions. What are you going to do with respect to efforts to protect Canadian industry and workers? Will we see, without the House in session, will we see an announcement of what his program would be in the next legislative session to provide that kind of support? And people have talked about, COVID-level support programs. I don't know if it would be that large, but saying to people, listen, if Trump is going to impose hardship on us, then government is going to be an instrument to help sustain and protect you, not just broad industry, but individual workers as we bear that assault.
Strategically, Lisa, you've got, let's say, 10 days between now and the election call. How do you use it to your, I guess, political advantage in that interim, in your view?
Yeah, I think the biggest decision they have to make is whether or not he seeks an audience with Donald Trump, because it could either end spectacularly well or he could get Zelensky'd. And neither of those, you just don't know which outcome you're going to get. So that's the one they're going to have to think about the hardest, I believe, and make sure that they seem to be doing something on the file regarding the United States, short of going down and seeing the president himself. But Vashi, I'm just going to get squishy for a second and say, for the families that are arriving for this moment, I mean, it is a pretty special moment to have your loved ones sworn into cabinet. If for the first time, people who are swearing into cabinet or are getting a new position. When you come in, there's a lovely Canadian Forces Quartet that plays music for you. You're in a beautiful room. I mean, for the moment that they're experiencing right now, it is a really cool thing. I know that we're the ones talking about all the politics around it, but I just want to say to the families who are watching and excited for their loved ones, it is a really cool thing. And enjoy the half an hour that it's going to be calm, because after that, you're not going to see your family member ever again, not for at least 7 weeks.
You could be squishy. Yeah, you could be squishy all you want. I think Canadians are, we can talk about the politics, but we're also in a moment where I think collectively, regardless of political stripe, we're all happy to see the process of democracy unfold in our country with integrity as we watch what's happening south of the border in such a different way. Kathleen, we're just watching, by the way, if you are just joining us, we're a few minutes out, maybe, from the start of the swearing-in ceremony. The room rather certainly is building up. We had started talking off about what the picks might mean politically, particularly where regional interests are concerned and where an election is concerned, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who are you trying to, I guess, cultivate an audience with, or who do you have electoral interest in? What, based on what you've seen so far?
Yeah, I think we have to look at today's cabinet picks also through the electoral lens, right? Not just the regional and gender, balance. It's actually who has an organization behind them, who can mobilize folks on the ground, volunteers, also who can raise money, right? That is part of this decision. That's why you see people like Melanie Joly, Francois Philippe Champagne staying in cabinet. cabinet. These are big players. They organize, big organizers in Quebec. They can deliver. And Carney needs to keep them not only happy because they're competent cabinet ministers, but he also needs to keep them because he needs them for the election. Any of the announcements over the next few days, what Carney's going to do is he's going to try to suck up that earned media, right? If I was him, advising him, which I'm obviously not, I would say do not go to the U.S. I think it's a brilliant move going to Europe. Not just, as Lisa said, you beget Zelensky's. Also, look at the Prime Minister of Ireland. He didn't fare that well in that meeting either.
UK Prime Minister.
Yeah, there's so many you can list. Like, it's just, it's not, the odds are not on you doing well if you sit down in that Oval Office with Mr. Trump. So I think that that's the wise move. Eat up all the earned media you can. Have a few announcements which will roll into your electoral platform and get yourself running. I'm not worried about the candidate numbers that Nick cited earlier. Listen, people who are political strategists who run campaigns, we know
What's up, monsters? Let's go.
fill those slots. So that's not really a metric that I would look at. I would look at dollars in the bank, fundraising numbers. I would look at media mentions, earned media, and if he can sustain this, and if he wins the framing war.
All right, former Governor General David Johnston making his way in. You can see at the front of your screen another former Governor General, Michaël Jean. We are going to take a quick commercial break, but this ceremony is slated to get underway shortly after we return from that break. Our special coverage continues in just 2 minutes. Stay right there.
Welcome along to the
Welcome back to our special coverage. We're back already because the ministers have started to filter out. Let's show you a live shot outside Rideau Hall, where we do anticipate the Prime Minister, the newly sworn-in Prime Minister Mark Carney, will soon take questions from reporters. There is his cabinet lining up behind him. Most, if not all, of them have assembled. It is a chilly day in Ottawa, but not nearly as cold as it has been, and we actually have some sunshine. So he will take questions for about 15 to 20 minutes from reporters. It's the first opportunity reporters have had in a while, I think since the debate, since after the English language Liberal leadership debate, to ask questions. And of course, there are a number of significant changes to ministries, name changes, as well as changes to what those ministers will actually be doing that we'd love some clarity on. We don't have a lot of specifics yet. The press release that announced the naming of cabinet ministers certainly went into some detail as to the message that Prime Minister Carney and his team are trying to send through this. The quote that they attributed to the Prime Minister: "This team is built for immediate action and focused on protecting Canadian workers, supporting."
Bud Light, refreshing taste that's easy to enjoy.
Deliver to Canadians faster, and we have an experienced team, they write, that is made to meet the moment we are in. Our government is united and strong, and we are getting right to work. Some of the front bench there, very familiar to Canadians. They retain their positions, kind of leading the Canada-U.S. file. Anita Anand, who was not going to run in the next election, has now decided to, and she becomes the Minister of Industry. She previously served as the Minister of Transport and overseeing internal trade. That job, the second part of that job, goes to Chrystia Freeland, who ran against Mark Carney for the leadership. She's there, I believe, in the family photo or the Assembly of Ministers behind the microphone. She ran against Mark Carney, placing second, a very distant second with about 8% of the vote versus almost 86% for Mark Carney. A lot of speculation heading into today about whether or not she would get an invitation to join cabinet. So she assumes the internal trade file. And now here is Mr. Carney, who is walking up to the microphone, and we will listen in live as he speaks to reporters. Oh, he's not speaking to reporters yet. He's greeting his cabinet. We will listen in live now.
OK. Que la fête commence. Alors, bonjour tout le monde. Hello, everyone. It is my honor to respond to the Governor General's request that I form a government. And it's a solemn duty to serve as Prime Minister at this time of great consequence for our country. The ceremony we just witnessed reflects the wonder of a country built on the bedrock of three peoples: Indigenous, French, and British. The opening and closing prayers evoke the original stewards of this land. They remind us of the deep roots from which we grow and underscore the values to which we aspire. The office of the Governor General links us through the Crown and across time to Canada's proud British heritage. Et la cérémonie s'est déroulée dans nos deux langues officielles.
Took place in both our official languages. Our bilingual identity makes us unique, and the French language enriches our culture.
Canadians have built a dynamic nation that celebrates its diversity, that cares for the vulnerable in society, and that always strives for a better tomorrow. Ce nouveau cabinet
This new cabinet is fully aware of our responsibilities to strengthen the foundations of our nation during this crisis. We need to build an even better Canada. It is my pleasure to introduce the extraordinary and well-qualified cabinet that of part of my government and will defend the values that we hold dear. Our government will change our way of working, will focus on the base or the essentials and adopt an action-oriented approach to deal with the challenges we must face.
How we work, so we can deliver better results faster to all Canadians. We have new ministers with new ideas, ready to respond to new threats and to seize new opportunities. Canada's new government is focused on the things that matter most to Canadians: growing more higher-paying jobs, improving affordability, and making Canada more secure. Canada's new government will be action-oriented, driven by a smaller but highly experienced team made to meet the moment we are in. Our leaner cabinet will focus on two priorities in particular. First, protecting Canadian workers and their families in the face of unjustified foreign trade actions. And second, growing this great country by putting more money in Canadians' pockets, by ensuring that government spends less so Canada can invest more, by building millions of homes, by making Canada a superpower in both conventional and clean energies, by creating new trade corridors with reliable partners, and by forging one Canadian economy out of 13. We will relentlessly pursue this positive agenda because Canadians know that negativity isn't strength. They know that negativity won't pay the rent or the mortgage. The negativity won't bring down the price of groceries. Negativity won't win a trade war. We know that by building together, we can give ourselves far more than anyone else can take away. Nous sommes maîtres chez nous.
We are masters of our domain, and our country is Canada strong, and our government is united and strong. We will start immediately with our first cabinet.
Our government is united and strong, and we will immediately get to work with our first cabinet meeting as soon as I respond to a few of your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Merci, Monsieur le Premier ministre. Nous allons maintenant passer à une période de questions de 15 minutes.
We will now have a
suivie.
15-minute Q&A.
Question period, one question, one follow-up. Merci.
Bon Fillon de TVA. Bonjour,
From
Monsieur le Premier
TVA.
ministre.
Hello, Mr. Prime Minister.
Enchanté. Vous allez vous
Delighted
rendre
to
en
meet
Europe
you.
au cours des prochains jours. Est-ce que
You're
vous
due to
comptez
go to
également
Europe in
aller
the
aux
coming
États-Unis
days. Do you also intend to go to the U.S. to meet Mr. Trump before you call the election?
J'ai reçu une invitation de
I received an invitation from the President of France to have a conversation on several issues, commercial issues, trade issues, and security in Europe, the Ukraine and Canada. Received another invitation from the Prime Minister of the UK, so it's a good idea to go because we need to diversify our trade partners and strengthen our security. I hope I'll have a conversation with the President of the U.S., but I don't have any plans for the moment to go there.
I received the questions on a trip to Paris and London in a few days. I received an invitation from the President of France to discuss a variety of issues, both economic, commercial, to reinforce those relationships, also issues related to security in Europe, in Canada. Similar discussions will be had with the Prime Minister in the United Kingdom. This is sensible. Security is a priority for this government, reinforcing our security, as is diversifying our trading and commercial relationships, of course, with both Europe and the United Kingdom. There are many opportunities. And as I said a moment ago in my remarks, there are historic ties. With respect to the President, I don't have plans to go to the United States. I look forward to speaking to him at the appropriate moment. Thank you.
Monsieur Carney, il y a Monsieur Rubio, Marco Rubio, ce matin dans
Marco Rubio in Charlevoix this morning
les propos de Donald Trump
essentially repeated Trump's statement by saying that Canada would be economically better off as a 51st state. As the Prime Minister, what do you say to that, to the U.S. Secretary? And he said it on Canadian soil. It's crazy. It's crazy. Simply, it's crazy. That's it. Full stop.
It's crazy.
In English?
His point is crazy? That's it.
Question.
Hi, Prime Minister Tom Perry with CBC. Can I ask you what your plans are for the next few weeks? Are you going to be bringing back the House? Are you going to be calling an early election? And if so, when should Canadians expect to go to the polls?
Well, they certainly should expect to go to the polls before November. The news today is behind me. An exceptional group of individuals who are serving Canada, united, focused cabinet, focused on action, focused on the issues for Canadians. We're, as I said a moment ago, we will be going to take some decisions which directly meet some of the objectives I set out in my remarks and we've been discussing. That's the news for today. There will be other news in the coming days with respect to ensuring that we have as strong a mandate that is needed for the time. Thank you.
And when you're in Europe, are you going to be seeking assurances from Canada's allies that this country will never become America's 51st state? And when would it be an appropriate time for you to take that message to the U.S. president?
Well, I've been clear. Personally, I've been clear. The ministers behind me, I think, to an individual, when asked, have been clear that we will never, ever, in any way, shape, or form, be part of the United States. America is not Canada. Look at the ceremony we just had. You could not have had that ceremony. You would not have that ceremony in America. Look at the cabinet behind me. You would not have that cabinet in America. You do not have that cabinet in America. We are a very fundamentally different country. So irrespective of any issues economically, fundamentally to our core, to our identity, is one reason why we have a minister, and I will thank Mr. Guilbeault to be our Minister of Canadian Identity and Culture and bringing in all those aspects and reinforcing them. So before we get to the economics of it, we won't be part of it. And when we get to the economics, and the president is a successful business person and deal maker, we're his largest client in so many industries. As the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Industry, Monsieur Leblanc and Monsieur Champagne have made this point. Clients expect respect and working together in a proper commercial way. So the nature of Canada means we won't. The economics means we shouldn't. And what you will see from this government is focusing on building here at home, building with different partners abroad, and that will reinforce the point. It's good. We're doing it for our own reasons, to be clear, for our own people, for the high-paying jobs. But eventually, the truth will out, and the Americans will understand as well. Thank you.
Our allies, sir, do you want to?
I don't think we need. Look, I don't think we need to hear it from. Nous sommes maîtres. We're masters in our home. We're in charge. You know, we're in charge. It's always nice when people say nice things about you, but we don't need it. We're not seeking it. What the discussions I will have on behalf of the government in Paris and in London will relate to opportunities that both our countries share, as well as our shared history.
Monsieur le Premier ministre, Valérie Gamache de Radio-Canada.
Mr. Prime Minister with the CBC, delighted to meet you. You have no Alberta-based minister, no ridings in Alberta. Is that because you're thinking of maybe running in an Alberta riding yourself?
Vous avez raison que
You're right that I grew up in Alberta.
Ma campagne à Edmonton.
And I lost my campaign in Edmonton. Now's not the time to announce my riding. So, yeah.
I'm complimenting the journalists from Radio-Canada, and I would like to compliment the very existence of Radio-Canada, and I'd like to reinforce that my government will be reinforcing. It goes back to Canadian identity, culture. This is away from the news, but the broader sense. So I'll finish the answer. I compliment the question. She's recognizing that I grew up in Alberta. I launched my campaign in Alberta. I'm just reinforcing today. Today, the story is behind me. And there will be more news because those behind me will be taking some important decisions this afternoon.
Monsieur Carney, depuis le début de votre
Mr.
point de
Carney,
presse, vous avez 3 fois
since the
mentionné
beginning
les
of the
langues
press,
officielles. Pourtant,
three
le
times you
nom
mentioned the
langue officielle
official
n'apparaît pas dans le nom
languages.
du ministère de Monsieur Guilbeault. Et vous
Why
avez
does
remplacé patrimoine par
Minister
identité canadienne.
Guilbeault's
Est-ce qu'il y a là un message
title
pour
not
le Québec?
include official
Pas du tout.
languages?
C'est un renforcement de notre identité. La langue française est au sein de
It's part of our
l'identité
identity.
canadienne. Et M.
French
Guilbeault,
language is
il est un ministre exceptionnel.
at the basis of
il a
impossible
maintenant,
to hear.
La responsabilité. Il a encore des responsabilités pour les langues
He has
officielles.
really
Mais
responsibility.
cette question d'identité canadienne, c'est plus large de notre langue officielle. C'est plus large de notre patrimoine. Ça existe maintenant. On renforce, on bâtit l'identité canadienne. Ça inclut, ça c'est clé. L'identité canadienne inclut la nature. Et une des responsabilités de M. Guilbeault est de ramasser toutes nos responsabilités en ce qui concerne la nature, la biodiversité, nos océans, et de les protéger et les promouvoir. Merci.
J'ai une question. Next question.
Prime Minister Carney, first off, congratulations.
Thank you.
Second, David Baxter, Canadian Press. April 1st is fast approaching, the date the consumer carbon tax is set to increase once again. You've talked about getting rid of it. How are you going to do it in the next 2 weeks?
Your question, how are we going to do it by the end of the day? That's a great question. And we'll come right back to you on that following the cabinet meeting.
In that order?
You have a better follow-up than that.
Oh, there is a better follow-up, but just to get clarification, you are going to do it by
Then that would be
cabinet
three
order?
questions, and everyone else will get angry.
There we go. We'll go back to it. So you've talked about Trump needing to show Canada respect.
President Trump.
President Trump, yes. President Trump needs to show Canada respect. You said that again just now. Are you not going to speak with President Trump until he cuts out this 51st state talk?
No. I look forward to speaking with President Trump. Just to be clear, we respect the United States. We respect President Trump. President Trump has put some very important issues at the top of his agenda. We understand his agenda. We understand the importance of addressing the scourge of fentanyl, which is a challenge here in Canada as well as the United States. And I would say that the measures that have been put in place in recent weeks in Canada and Mexico, also the United States, means that we are making tremendous progress. I'll speak specifically for against fentanyl. We understand the importance President Trump places on American workers and American jobs. We want him and his administration to understand the importance we put on Canadian workers and Canadian jobs. And we will look for avenues to work together so that both objectives are met in terms of both our great economies, just as we are doing, and the people behind me have led this, just as we are doing with respect to the scourge of fentanyl. Thank you.
Question. Next one.
Hi, Prime Minister Carney. I'm Jillian Piper with Global News. I understand that your assets have been put into a blind trust. I wanted to ask you, what is the value of the assets and where did they come from? How can Canadians know that there's no conflict of interest if they don't know where the assets come from?
That's an odd question, or odd way of framing it. The assets are in a blind trust. So, and can I point out that for those who don't follow this, I have 6 months to put, or 120 days to put the assets in a blind trust. In a blind trust, you don't know, but by ability. I would like to reassure you that the employment income, employment as a public servant, and employment and I would note as well that employment in the private sector is something that the leader of the opposition has never experienced. And I would point as well that complying or meeting standards expected of a leader of a party, let alone a prime minister, is something that the leader of opposition has not respected either, and I'm speaking directly with respect to his refusal, still at a time of great crisis, to get his security clearance, something I managed to do in 2 weeks. En ce qui concerne mes actifs,
as for my assets,
J'ai eu des jobs dans le secteur privé.
I've held jobs in the private sector.
Et j'ai des actifs maintenant, et c'est dans une fiducie.
And that's where I
Fiducie avec,
accumulated
en
these
effet,
assets,
je
and
sais
they're in a
plus,
blind trust.
la composition
I
des
no
actifs.
longer know
Ça, c'est le
what
point,
the assets are made of. That's the point of a blind trust.
Mes affaires dans une
And
position en ce qui concerne la
I
fiducie.
arranged my affairs
Avant d'être
according,
Premier ministre.
put them
Avant
into a
d'être
blind
Premier
trust before
J'aurais
becoming
fait,
prime minister.
une
Before
centaine,
becoming prime
une
minister.
100 jours, 120 jours de le faire.
I have
Et
120
le chef
days to do it.
d'opposition
And the
est
opposition
incapable,
leader
il
is
refuse, d'être-
unable. He
probablement il est
refuses.
capable, mais il
He's
refuse,
probably able, but he refuses
d'avoir sa carte
to
sécuritaire
get his security clearance
après 3 années.
after 3
C'est
years.
inacceptable pour moi.
It's unacceptable to me.
Prime Minister, you keep pointing at the group behind you, your new cabinet. There's only 2 representatives from the West. What's your message to Western Canada?
So the numbers in the cabinet are all necessarily smaller because the cabinet is much smaller. And the cabinet is much smaller because it's focused on the issues that are most important to Canadians, meeting the moment, and the moment is a moment of crisis. We have of Canada, of course, and I'm from the West. And I would note maybe as well, and this is a challenge I think we have. I'll just make a general point. Let's take an example of Chrystia Freeland. Okay, exceptional minister, exceptional public service. Chrystia Freeland lives in Toronto. Chrystia Freeland is from the West. Chrystia Freeland is from Alberta. But people get classified in a way that limits the breadth of experience. I could give you many examples of the pan-Canadian nature of this cabinet.
Last question and follow-up. Dernière question et question de suivi.
Ramsey with the Toronto Star. Prime Minister, speaking of your cabinet, the front line of your cabinet and the vast majority of your cabinet were all ministers during Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's time. How does this represent change?
Well, there's a couple of things. One is this first thing, smaller cabinet, more focused on action. Everybody in this cabinet is senior. Everybody in this cabinet is senior, so I don't accept the front line and the implication that there's a front line and another line. The second thing is one of the top issues, of course, is the crisis with respect to the United States and the opportunity with respect to trade diversification. So keeping together those individuals who have been on, and now I'm going to use your term, the front line, but the front line in a commercial battle, keeping together those individuals so that we are seamlessly addressing these issues and seizing the opportunities was very important to us, and that's reflected in the cabinet. But of course, it's reflected fundamentally in their capabilities, which are here for the moment.
And on President Trump, what makes you think you personally would be better fit to handle him than Trudeau was, and why do you think he'll have more respect for you than he did for him?
Look, I'm not going to put myself into to represent that President Trump in any way, shape, or form. President Trump and I, though, we share some experiences. I have been in the private sector. I have worked in the real estate sector. I have done large transactions. I have worked with him during his first presidency at the G20, at the G7. I respect what he is looking to accomplish. And we have built a base through the interactions that we've had, including as of yesterday with the meetings of the Minister of Finance, well, I'll say because their roles have slightly changed, Monsieur Champagne and Monsieur Leblanc, and Premier Ford with the Secretary of Commerce, as well as the meetings that the Minister of Foreign Affairs had with her G7 counterparts, including Secretary Rubio. So we are building that base. But in many respects, part of my experience overlaps with that of the president. We'll both be looking out for our countries. But he knows, and I know from long experience, that we can find mutual solutions that win for both.
Thank you.
In French? Regarding
En
Mr.
ce qui
Trump,
concerne
please.
M. Trump.
With regard to Mr. Trump.
Alors,
So-
lui et moi, nous
He and
avons des expériences similaires.
Have
dans le
similar
secteur
experience in the
par
private
exemple,
sector,
dans
for example,
l'investissement, dans le
investment,
secteur immobilier.
and the real
par
estate
exemple.
sector,
Je
for
le connais
example.
et
I know
j'ai
him.
travaillé avec lui.
And I
pour
worked
lui,
with
en effet,
him,
parce qu'il a
for
été
him,
chef
actually.
d'État pendant son premier mandat.
It was because it was
afin de
during his
régler
first
des choses dans le
mandate.
secteur financier,
In order to settle
à l'échelle
things in
du
the
G20.
financial sector at the G20, what's important is that Canada has made progress
dans les discussions de M. Champagne, Mme Joly, M.
with
Leblanc,
Mr. Champagne
avec
and Ms. Joly and Mr. Leblanc, along with their colleagues.
qui existe.
There's a basis, a foundation,
Trouver des solutions à partir
and we need to find
cela.
solutions based on that. Thank you.
Press conference. C'est ce qu'il va faire à notre presse conférence.
That's the end of the press conference.
And that is Prime Minister Mark Carney taking questions from reporters alongside his newly sworn-in cabinet. There will be a cabinet meeting later today. He says his government, for however long it ends up lasting, will be focused on two distinct priorities. The first, protecting workers and families, he said, against the threat of tariffs and economic ruin of sorts from Donald Trump, from U.S. President Donald Trump. And the second on looking inward and, in his words, building the Canadian economy out. A number of other notable points made or bits of news out of that press conference. He did confirm, Mr. Carney did confirm that he will head as Prime Minister to Europe next week, that he will do so on the invitation of French President Emmanuel Macron, who wanted to have a discussion that he mentioned would involve issues around security and economic ties. He also was asked what riding he would run in, when an election call was coming. He would not provide any specifics, just kind of tongue-in-cheek said that there would be an election before November, but then in another instance indicated that there would be other news on that in the coming days. I am back here with Scott Reed, Kathleen Monk, Lisa Raitt, and Nick Nanos. Nick, I'll start with you. Your read on, first of all, the big takeaway for me is I've been 10 years of covering Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Those are the shortest answers I've heard in a long time. But your takeaway over how that went.
You know, very quickly, three key things. Messaging to Quebec, he talked about being master of our own house. Quebecers understand what that means. It's very different than what I'll say Pierre Poilievre's Canada First. Resonates well in the Radio Canada stuff. Second, the West, you know, saying that he is a Westerner. He considers himself from Alberta. But most importantly for Trump, he's had two messages for Donald Trump. First of all, that he's going to work for and look for common ground between the Americans and Canada. And second of all, talks of Canada being the 51st state, crazy. You know, we talk about short.
It's crazy. That was the shortest answer.
That was the shortest answer. Crazy. And he didn't want to elaborate, didn't need to elaborate. It's kind of like crazy.
Kathleen.
Yeah.
He said also that he was asked on multiple occasions, to the point all of you brought up, about whether or not he'd meet with Donald Trump, and he said that, you know, that there was no plan
invite.
for that, no invite at the time, and then later on said, look, we have common ground. I can, you know, we've have some shared experience, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I thought that was an interesting point, that he pulled out his resume, that he's actually worked with Donald Trump in the past, and he's done similar deals as Donald Trump. He has that kind of commercial experience, and then took the opportunity in another question to actually take a jab at the opposition leader, Pierre Poilievre, saying he doesn't have that experience. He hasn't worked in the private sector like Mr. Carney has. But listen, I thought, you know, the first thing that has to be said about that press conference, he took multiple questions at 5 or 6 different outlets by my count. You know, he survived it. And his message, which is the big, you know, when we have people like pollsters and pundits alike saying, you know, this guy's never been elected, he might not be able to do this job. He just showed on his first outing that he can do this job. And he said it was a time of consequence, and that he actually was looking for reliable partners in the world. So I think that's interesting to underscore why he is going to Europe right away. He pulled also from his speech from Sunday night and made this point that he's going to be pursuing a relentlessly positive agenda, in contrast to the negative agenda he's hearing from the opposition leaders, and saying directly that negativity won't pay the rent, it won't lower your grocery prices, and it won't win a trade war. And so driving that message home, I thought, was a polite way of basically taking a job at Pierre Pierre Poilievre.
Well, I think he's trying to create contrast right off the bat to what everyone was saying. Like, this is day one of the. I mean, day one of the campaign felt like December 6th, but it's really it's really right now though. So certainly while he was, there was some content to what he said, it was political in nature too. Scott, your takeaway?
I was struck by a couple of things, both substance and style. On substance, almost a singular focus on economic issues, on economic management. When you talk about the two priorities he highlighted, both of them fundamentally about the economy, how we manage our relationship with the United States and making certain that we grow our economy and then we return more money to people's pockets. That's like bang on the polling numbers right now. So wasn't a lot of talk about much else. That was the concentration, economic, a managerial focus. And then secondly, with respect to style, as you guys said, I mean, Trudeau would speak grandly of opportunities. He spoke plainly, directly about obligations. He was short and direct and to the point. And it brings up the word, in my mind, of managerial. He presents himself as a man who is here to meet this moment, to manage our challenges with the United States, manage our economy, experienced, maybe a little dry, maybe a little gray, but maybe that's just what people need and want in this moment. So I thought both in terms of substance and style, it was very interesting. Last thing, going back to substance, I think he made it crystal clear that the news of the day coming out of the cabinet is going to be the death of the carbon tax. How they execute that, we shall see, but he previewed that unmistakably.
Yeah, he said he was asked, how are you going to get rid of it before April 1st in the next 2 weeks? And he said, before the end of the day, we'll have more news on that. Lisa, the last word goes to your take.
Unleash your inner lion at Leo Vegas, part of MGM Resorts International.
That he gave out on his two priorities sounded like what I ran on in 2012. To be honest, it's exactly the same kind of platform. What Mark Carney has to do, though, is he has to separate. He has to actually suspend the belief that the reason why we have to fix the economy is because the previous Liberal government wrecked the economy. And he's got to be able to create distance between those two. I'm here to fix it, but he doesn't want any responsibility or liability for the situation that they find themselves in today after almost 10 years of a Liberal government. So that is going to be tricky footwork. And maybe he did, I think he did fine today. I think he did fine for his first outing. I'm not going to take that away from him at all. But debates are going to be a different thing. And he may have thought that he landed a blow on Pierre Poilievre today, kind of like, whacking at him with respect to his security clearance. You got to have more than that, my friend. It's going to be a lot harder than that when you get into the full battle of this general campaign that's coming.
Okay, I'm going to leave it on that note. Thanks, everyone, for sharing so much of your time in your analysis today. I sincerely appreciate it. Scott Reed, Lisa Raitt, Kathleen Monk, and Nick Nanos, as well as a thanks to my colleagues Michael Couture and Colton Prale on the ground at Rideau Hall. There will still be more reaction to come to the swearing in of the 24th Prime Minister of this country, including the leaders of both the NDP and the Conservatives. We will bring those press conferences to you live when they happen. I'll leave our special coverage there. I'm Vashi Kapelos in Ottawa. Thank you so much for watching. After the break, Todd Vander Hayden will pick it up in Toronto.
Welcome along to the Australian Grand Prix.